This is Chapter 9 of The Penderwicks in Spring. Cilantro? Ben was in his room gluing rocks to his giant cardboard Minnesota. His mom had helped him mark where all the mountains would go, and these rocks were for the Mesabi Range. Ms. Lambert had said that they could just draw on their states, but it seemed to Ben an opportunity too good to miss for showing off some of his rocks. Plus, Raphael was using pieces of sponge on his to represent swamps, and was even trying to figure out how to keep the swamps wet without them falling right off Florida. In between gluing rocks, Ben looked out his window at the strange new car, flash van, that had arrived the night before. Jane and Skye thought it even more hideous than the photograph had shown, but Ben thought it stunning. Raphael said that when they became famous movie directors, they would ride around in driverless cars, except when they were in their private helicopters. Until then, though, Ben was delighted with Flash Van. "Ben!" Batty was outside his door. "Time to walk to school." Ben looked at his clock. They always left the house at exactly 8:20 a.m., and it was now 8:04 a.m. "No, it's not." "I need to be there early. Let's go." Ignoring her, Ben glued another rock to Minnesota. Never had homework seem so much like play. Though he had to admit that he wasn't as interested in the cities and lakes as he was in the mountains. The mountains in Minnesota had such great names, like Disappointment Mountain, Toad Mountain, Ghost Hill, and Pilot Knob. Batty shoved open his door, knocked over 2 hangers plus a pile of small rocks he'd added for extra security. "If we leave right now," she said, "I'll carry your backpack to school." Here was a powerful incentive, or move to action. "And you'll carry it home too, even if I put in rocks I find at recess?" "Yes. Well, up to 3 rocks anyway, and not huge ones. Now hurry." With Ben hurrying, Batty was able to get to school with a precious 15 minutes to spare for talking to Mrs. Grunfeld. She sent him to Ms. Lambert, headed to the music room, and found Kiko waiting for her outside the door. "I thought you might need hand-holding," she told Batty. Batty gratefully took Kiko's hand. "I'm determined to go through with it. Musica anima mea est, which means music is my life." "Right," said Kiko, and knocked on the door. Mrs. Grunfeld opened the music room door with a smile. "Batty, good morning, and—" "Kiko Trice," said Kiko. "I'm just here for moral support." "Mine?" asked Mrs. Grunfeld, surprised. "No, Batty's. She'll explain." So Mrs. Grunfeld took Batty into the room. "Why do you need moral support?" "I've decided I want voice lessons after all." Batty took the $20 bill from her pocket. "Here's some money I've earned, and I'm going to be getting another 20 every week from now on." "Good for you. Coming up with both the resolve and the money. I'm proud of you." "Thank you." Batty waited for Mrs. Grunfeld to offer to be her teacher. Maybe $20 wasn't enough. "Do lessons cost more than this?" "That depends on the teacher you choose. I could put together a list of teachers for you, ones I'm familiar with. Would you like that?" "Yes, thank you." "Come see me on Friday, then, and I'll have it ready for you." Batty thanked her again and walked out, defeated. "What did she say?" asked Kiko. "That she'll put together a list of singing teachers for me." "But what about her? Oh, Batty, you didn't even ask, did you?" Kiko knocked on the door again, and when Mrs. Grunfeld opened it, took matters into her own hands. "Batty's too shy to tell you that she wants you to be her singing teacher." "My goodness, that didn't even occur to me." Kiko pushed Batty back into the room and closed the door behind her. "I understand if it's because I don't have enough money," Batty told Mrs. Grunfeld. "My dear, it's not the money. I'm simply not a professional voice coach. Just a generalist at best, which means somebody not specialized. And besides, as school's soon over, I'm going on a tour of the great opera house of Europe. I'll see Cosa fan tutte at La Scala and Fidelio at the Vienna State Opera. Doesn't that sound marvelous?" Batty felt herself folding up inside, like an accordion. "Yes, I guess so, but you wouldn't let me belt like the people on television." Tears were starting to come. though Batty fought them. "And another teacher might not like my voice." "That last part is impossible." Mrs. Grunfeld went into her desk and came back with a box of tissues. "Here, wipe your eyes and let me think." Batty sat down on the piano bench to get out of the way. Mrs. Grunfeld's thinking seemed to include doing little dance moves while softly humming. When Batty listened closely, she recognized "Plant a Radish" from the Fantastics, which gave her hope because she loved the Fantastics. Mrs. Grunfeld got all the way to the part about planting beanstalks before stopping in front of Batty. "You must understand that if you're serious about singing, you will need a better teacher than I." She held up her hand before Batty could protest again. "But there's no reason for you not to begin here with me on an informal basis. That is, if you don't mind missing recess one day a week." No, I don't mind missing recess." Batty was ready to run in place and do jumping jacks right then and there to prove how little she needed recess. "Good. We'll start today since the weather's so bad. I'll make it all right with your classroom teacher." "That's Miss Rowe, but she's a little strict. And the weather was glorious." "I will take care of all of that," said Mrs. Grunfeld, and Batty believed her. It was hard to imagine anyone or anything that Mrs. Grunfeld couldn't take care of. "And put away your money, Batty. Save it for when you go on your real coach. The good ones can be expensive." "Oh, Mrs. Grunfeld, I can't," gasped Batty, overwhelmed. Now, none of that. Spending extra time with you will be a pleasure for me. I must confess, I've been thinking of a song that would be just right for your voice. I'm afraid it's a love song, but then so many of the better songs are. Would you mind?" Batty held tight to the piano bench to keep herself from leaping and smothering Mrs. Grunfeld with a gigantic hug. "I don't mind about love as long as it's not a duet and I have to sing with one of those boys." "Agreed. No love duets." Mrs. Grunfeld laughed. "I will work you hard, Batty Penderwick, even though I'm just a generalist. You're certain this is what you want?" "Yes," answered Batty, "this is what I want." And Duchess, by lunchtime, it was raining. Not that I think Mrs. Grunfeld can actually make it rain, but you have to admit it was an interesting coincidence. So anyway, during recess she taught me a song called "Not a Day Goes By," written by Stephen Sondheim, who Mrs. Grunfeld says uses melody to express yearning better than anyone has since Verdi. And she said that Sondheim's atypical tonal intervals are only one example of his genius, which I knew already from listening to A Little Night Music 8 million times, and that singing his songs would help me stretch my understanding of melody. Here, Duchess, listen to a little bit. But Batty could barely get into the song without giggling. Duchess was singing with her again. Also, I told Mrs. Grunfeld about Geoffrey and the grand 11th birthday concert. She said it was a great idea and that Geoffrey is my mentor, which is Italian for mentor. Mentore, which is Italian for mentor. It sounds better in Italian, don't you think? Batty stopped talking to shake the rain from her hair to make sure the Duchess hadn't yet worn herself out. While Batty loved this soft spring rain, it couldn't be pleasant for the dog. Because Duchess was so low to the ground, any rain that missed her wide back splashed up to her undercarriage. "Are you sure you wouldn't be happier in the wagon? I don't want you catching a cold. 1 R for yes and 2 for no." "Arf, arf, arf, arf." 4 wasn't a choice. "Okay, I'll decide. You're going into the wagon." Batty pulled the wagon alongside Duchess and removed the plastic bag she'd laid over the blanket to keep it dry. "Arf, arf, 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 arf." "Shh," said Batty, tipping the wagon on its side. But Duchess showed no interest in getting into it. "What's going on with you? Why won't you get in?" "Arf, arf, 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 arf." Batty was amazed that Duchess had the energy for so much barking and pulling. Maybe it wasn't that she was trying to get away from the wagon. They were in the cul-de-sac now, and Duchess was pointing toward Quigley Woods. Maybe she was trying to go there. Batty let Duchess tug her for a few feet closer to the path. Yes, that's what she wanted. And while Batty thought the woods too damp and mucky for an overweight Dachshund, she couldn't help but wonder what had brought about this sudden burst of life. "Okay, but I hope you have a good reason, and it had better not be a rabbit, because I don't believe in terrorizing rabbits. Not that you could keep up with a rabbit." On they went into the woods, with Duchess straining against her halter, her nose to the ground, definitely tracking something. At least Batty no longer had to be concerned for the local rabbits. What with the barking and the clamor of the empty wagon, every animal for miles around would be warned of their approach. Now they were plunging off the path, with the Duchess swerving around trees, and Batty doing what she could to slow her down. All at once the little dog stopped, panting, and clearly delighted with herself. "Not a rabbit," said Batty. Duchess had led her, in fact, to another dog. An oddly wrinkled and soaking wet dog crouching beside a wreck of fallen tree branches, torn down in a long-ago ice storm. While he wagged his tail feebly, seemingly relieved to have been found, Duchess strutted and yipped, as proud as if she herself had created this mournful beast out of the raw clay of nature. Batty knew about approaching strange dogs, no matter how tame they seemed. She sidled slowly toward this one, being careful not to make eye contact, and, when he didn't growl or bare his teeth, held out her fist for him to sniff, which he did, snuffling sadly, then ducking his head for her to pat. Now she could see the problem. He'd managed to get his leash snarled up in the dead branches, and he was stuck. Poor guy. What are you doing here? She read the tag hanging from his collar. The address was on Marsh Lane, 2 streets over from Gardam. The dog's name was listed, too. Cilantro? Like the plant? He cocked his ears, acknowledging that while Cilantro was indeed his name, it wasn't his fault. He did seem to believe, however, that being stuck with his fault was his fault, and for this he was apologetic. "Don't worry, I'll get you out of here. But, Duchess, you have to settle down first." Duchess's journey through the woods was catching up with her. Obediently, she toppled onto her side, her forelegs twitching. Batty tied her leash to her wagon, just in case she miraculously revived and decided to dash off again. The untangling wasn't easy, and Batty picked up lots of mud and a few scratches in the process. But soon Cilantro was free and saying hello and thanks to Duchess. Now it was time to get him back to Marsh Lane, where she hoped someone was terribly worried about him. First, however, she had to get Duchess back to the Evasians, who would certainly be starting to wonder where she was. And with Duchess, now looking half dead, it was clear she'd have to be put back into the wagon to go anywhere at all. Embarrassed in front of her new friend, Duchess at first resisted the wagon, but once Cilantro had gravely sniffed and approved, she allowed Batty to lever her up and in. Batty started back the way she'd come, now with 2 dogs. Cilantro followed more willingly than she'd expected, though he did slow them down by continuously changing his mind about walking next to, behind, or in front of the wagon. By the time they emerged onto Gardam Street, he'd switched positions 7 times, and Batty was losing patience with having to unwind his leash from the wagon pole. It didn't help that the rain had decided to come down harder, and though they'd all been wet before, now they were drenched, and the blanket underneath Duchess was soaked through and through. Such a relief, then, for Batty to spot Ben and Raphael running from the Geiger's house to the Penderwicks. Even from here they looked wet and muddy, which meant they'd probably been digging for rocks in the dirt, in the rain. But dirty or not, they could still take Duchess home so that Batty could get this crazy Cilantro back to where he belonged. "Ben," she called, "Raphael, come here." They veered toward her, shouting, 11 o'clock, 11 o'clock. Batty assumed it was some new code of theirs. Cilantro, however, assumed they were making war cries. He cowered behind Duchess and her wagon, trying to blend into the scenery. It didn't work. "Where'd you get that dog?" asked Ben. "Duchess found him." "Are you going to keep him?" asked Raphael. "Cilantro? No, he's got a home," though she wondered what kind of owner would let such a goofy dog run off by himself. "Good, because he doesn't look normal," said Ben. "He's not actually abnormal, I think." She looked doubtfully at the wrinkly dog, now peering around Duchess at the boys. "He didn't get this scared until you started screaming. 11 o'clock, 11 o'clock. What's it mean anyway?" "Nick," said Ben. "He's with Tommy now in Delaware, and he's going to leave after dinner, and he should be home around 11 o'clock. Isn't that great? Ready, Raphael?" "Golf, Romeo, Echo, Alpha, Tango. Great! Golf, Romeo, Echo, Alpha, Tango," they chanted together, jumping up and down as they did it. Cilantro slunk back behind Duchess. The boys are happy, not angry, Batty told the frightened dog, but that didn't help. Ben, I have to get Cilantro back to his house. Please take Duchess home and tell the Evasians that Duchess walked really far, and I'm sorry she's so wet. Encouraged by the memory of Mrs. Evasian's cider donuts, Ben and Raphael willingly took over Duchess while Batty set off with Cilantro. If she hadn't been certain she'd ever see him again, she would have told him about Nick being a soldier and how good it was that he was coming home, though Batty did hope he'd gotten over his obsession with finding the best sport for everyone, that is especially for her. But then Cilantro probably wouldn't have listened anyway. He was too busy growling at anything he found unfamiliar, including several trash cans and a bicycle leaning against a garage. When they got too close to a recycling bin, he went all out and barked. His bark was as peculiar as his looks, plaintive, meaning expressing suffering, and deep like a lovelorn tuba. When they reached Marsh Lane, Cilantro pulled Batty in a straight line to his house, where he threw himself the front door, scrabbling and barking. Batty could hear people shouting his name even before the door opened, and when it did, chaos and a happy reunion ensued, or began. There was a man with a baby in a sling, and 2 other small children at his feet, all of them thrilled, but none as thrilled as Cilantro, who disappeared into the house without even a backward glance at Batty. The man's name was Mr. Holland, and Batty forgave him for pet neglect as soon as he explained that they were new to the neighborhood and just getting adjusted, and that since Annalise, one of the small children, had let Cilantro escape around lunchtime, they had called the police and the shelters and had driven all around Cameron putting up flyers. "We were afraid we'd never see him again," he said. "Where did you find him?" "In Quigley Woods, but I had help," said Batty. "A dog I walk led me to him." "You're a dog walker? But that's great. Do you want a new client?" No. The last thing Batty wanted was yet another dog to walk, particularly a dog as prone to trouble as Cilantro. If she'd been better at talking to strangers, she'd have come up with a firm refusal from Mr. Holland. As it was, she could only stutter about how she didn't think she was qualified to walk more than 1 dog at a time, and how her parents would have to approve, and how they might say no, and anyway, there could be an important dusting job coming up any day now. But nothing could discourage Mr. Holland. He offered Batty another $20 a week to add Cilantro to her roster, and he'd call her parents to discuss it all that very evening, and insisted she'd take another $10 right then as a reward for bringing the dog back to his loving family, especially Annalise, who'd been racked with guilt since letting him go in the first place. Batty trudged back home through the rain, stunned with this new development. Suddenly she had 2 new dogs in her life, when she wanted none. Because her parents would probably say yes, Marsh Lane wasn't so far away, and there'd been no calls from other neighbors with dusting jobs or anything else, so she didn't have that as an excuse. Soon, though, Batty reminded herself of what was important. Musica anima mea est, squared her shoulders, and hummed a little Sondheim to cheer herself up. Ben had begged to be allowed to stay awake until Nick got home, but to no avail. That Lieutenant Geiger could arrive without being greeted by Penderwicks, and without even the welcome home signs, which hadn't been put out because of the rain, was too awful for Ben to contemplate, or to think about. So he didn't. Instead, after his parents had said good night, he crept over to Batty's room. She was reading Masterpiece about a boy named James and his friend Marvin, who happens to be a beetle. It was high on her list of books she refused to ruin by writing about in a book report. "You've got to keep me awake until Nick comes home," Ben said. "That's hours from now. How am I supposed to keep you awake?" "You can talk to me." He sat down on the bed. "Tell me about Cilantro again, and how Dad said you can walk him, especially since he's named after a plant." Ben knew the whole story already. He and Batty had both listened to their mom's side of the conversation when Mr. Holland called, and again while she and their dad agreed that Batty should be allowed to walk Cilantro. "You know as much as I do," she answered. "Why would I tell you again?" "Because I need to stay awake, or you can hum to me. You hum all the time anyway." "I don't hum all the time." She didn't want Ben noticing such things. "Then let's play a game. Please, Batty. I really want to see Nick tonight." Because Batty knew it would indeed be nice to have Penderwicks awake for Nick when he got home, she put aside Masterpiece and got out the board game, Othello. They played game after game after game, while the clock crept much too slowly toward 11, until finally she stretched out. "Batty," said Ben, poking her, "wake up." But she wouldn't, so he stretched out too, just to get comfortable, and the next thing he knew he woke up with his face planted in the middle of the Othello board. He started up. The clock said 10:55. Furious with himself, and peeling off the game pieces that had stuck to his cheeks and forehead, he ran across the hall and to the window in his room. It was okay. There was no blue truck yet, and the rain had stopped. Now he could put out the signs before Nick got home. Ben crept down the steps, but paused when he heard Sky and Jane talking in the living room. "Now she's sending me music he's written," said Sky. "Last week it was Pavane for SP, and tonight I got this one. Unrequited in D minor. Wow. It's not like I can read music. You can ask Batty to play them for you on the piano." "Yeah, right. It's embarrassing enough showing these to you. At least he doesn't put words to them. I don't think I could stomach an entire song about his unrequited love for me." Most of what had at first sounded to Ben like gibberish, especially the Pavane and the unrequited, whatever they were, now became clear. His sister's down there talking about Geoffrey. If he weren't so desperate to put out Nick's signs, he would have gone right back up to his room. Ben absolutely did not want to get caught in another discussion of love. "He wrote music for me once," said Jane, "when I was 10. Remember? I thought it was the most interesting thing that had ever happened to me." "So why didn't he fall for you? You would have appreciated him." "Sky, he's always been nuts for you, ever since the first time you two met. I crashed into him and almost knocked him out. Well, now you know not to do that anymore." Ben heard a sort of half-groan, half-mumble from Sky, which seemed to be the end of the conversation. After a few minutes of quiet, he felt safe enough to resume his way downstairs. He was almost to the bottom baby gate when Jane started up again. "I was telling Jerome about wanting to be a writer, and he said that to be a writer one must have a great heart. At least I think that's what he said." "It's not necessarily true anyway," answered Sky. "I know. I thought of asking him what about Sartre, and then he was off on something else, and I got completely lost. He speaks French so quickly." "Because he's French?" This time, the end of talking was marked by Jane throwing a pillow at Sky. Again, Ben waited for a few moments before moving on, but he didn't wait long enough. Just as he started over the baby gate, he heard Sky. "I just miss Geoffrey. The old Geoffrey. The way he was before he started—" More love talk. Ben tried to stop himself, but he overbalanced and ended up tipping headfirst over the gate and onto the floor. Both sisters were with him in a minute, picking him up and inspecting him for damage. "I'm not hurt," he said, trying to regain his dignity. "I just came down to put out the signs for Nick." "We put them out when the rain stopped," said Sky, "and left on the outdoor light so he could see them." "You should go back to bed," said Jane. "Nick might not be home for hours." "Please let me wait with you," said Ben. "Please." Sky looked at Jane and shrugged, and Jane looked at Sky and nodded. Then they took him back into the living room and settled him on the couch between them. He was determined that this time he truly would stay awake all night if necessary, even if he had to listen to his sisters talking about love stuff the whole time. But Sky picked up a book, nothing he could read over her shoulder, unfortunately. Too many long words about something called string theory. Jane started scribbling in a blue notebook, and he didn't even try to read it over her shoulder. What Jane wrote was always private until she decided to share it. Despite Ben's resolve to stay awake, soon he'd slumped against Sky, lulled to sleep by the soft rustle of turning pages. He woke up once when Jane had murmured she was going to bed and covered him with a blanket before she went, and another time his eyelids fluttered open long enough for him to see Sky standing by the window, looking out on guard. After that, Ben sank deep into his dreams, which eventually turned into a tale of being lifted off a couch and carried outside. He struggled against that. He was too old to be carried, until all at once he was awake and being handed over into the strong arms of Lieutenant Nick Geiger. Ben started to cry, happy this time, and Nick was laughing and making jokes. and Mr. and Mrs. Geiger were out there too, also crying. Even Mr. Geiger and then Mrs. Geiger was saying that Nick needed his rest. Lots and lots of rest and sleep. And Skye took Ben back from Nick. She carried him home again, but once there he climbed upstairs into his bunk by himself. Nick remembered me, he said to Skye as she tucked him in. Of course he did, you nincompoop. Now go to sleep and don't tell anybody we let you stay up, okay? Dad and Iantha would be furious. Okay, I Lima, Oscar, Victor, echo you, Skye. Lima, Oscar, Victor, echo you too, buddy. And that is the end of chapter 9.